The distant planet of Kepler, 186f wasn't supposed to be a battlefield. It was meant to be a routine survey mission for warrior Rose of the Stellar Guard. Her people, the Astrians, had been mapping this sector for decades, searching for resources to help their dying civilization. Rose's silvery skin glinted in the red dwarf star's light as she conducted her scans. Her tall, athletic frame was encased in advanced combat armor, standard procedure even for peaceful missions. The Astrians had learned the hard way that space was rarely as empty as it seemed. That lesson proved true when the first plasma bolts streaked across the rocky plain. Raiders. Rose's combat computer identified the attackers, space pirates who preyed on survey teams and colonists. They must have followed her ship's energy signature. There were at least 20 of them, armed with stolen military gear. Rose took cover behind a boulder, returning fire with her pulse rifle. The raiders were using experimental shield technology that made their shots nearly impossible to dodge. One blast clipped her shoulder, but her armor held. Then she saw it, the raiders were herding her toward a ravine. It was a classic trap maneuver. But with her ship destroyed in the initial ambush, she had no choice but to fall back. What she didn't expect was the land mine. The explosion caught her mid-stride. Even through her armor's dampeners, the pain was excruciating. When the dust settled, Rose found herself staring at where her legs used to be, now ending in mangled stumps just above the knees. Her armor's medical systems were working overtime to keep her conscious and stop the bleeding, but she knew it was only delaying the inevitable. The raiders were closing in. Rose prepared herself for a final stand, determined to take as many with her as she could. Her people didn't surrender, it wasn't their way. That's when she heard the distinctive sound of human dropships cutting through the atmosphere. The United Earth Marine Corps had a small outpost on Kepler, 186f. They weren't supposed to interfere with alien affairs, humanity was still new to the galactic community and tried to stay neutral. But as Rose watched the dropships deploy their troops with practiced precision, she realized these humans might not care about diplomatic protocols. Contact. Multiple hostiles. A human voice crackled over an open comm channel. Looks like raiders hitting. Wait, is that an Astrian? The last thing Rose saw before passing out was a squad of human marines charging toward her position, their weapons already blazing at the raiders. Their combat suits were primitive compared to Astrian technology, but there was something impossibly determined in their movements. The universe, it seemed, had more surprises in store for Rose than just raiders. Staff Sergeant Mark Anderson had seen his share of combat during his 10 years in the United Earth Marine Corps, but he'd never encountered anything quite like this. The alien warrior lay unconscious, her silvery skin reflecting the red sunlight, while his squad kept the raiders pinned down with suppressing fire. "Command's not going to like this, Sarge," Lieutenant Cooper radioed from her position. "We're supposed to stay out of alien conflicts." "Look at her armor, LT," Mark replied, checking the alien's vital signs with his medical scanner. "She's Astrian military. Their tech is leagues ahead of ours. Having them owe us a favor might be worth the diplomatic headache." But it wasn't really about politics. Mark had seen too many good soldiers die alone on forgotten battlefields. He wasn't about to let it happen again, human or not. "Jones, Peters, get that medical pod over here. Rivera, Martinez, keep those raiders busy." Mark barked orders while applying emergency trauma gel to the alien's wounds. The medical pod was basic human tech, but it would have to do. The raiders were getting bold, pressing their attack despite taking casualties. They wanted the Astrian badly, probably to steal her advanced technology. Mark had heard stories about what raiders did to their captives, and he wasn't about to let that happen. "Sarge, her readings are all over the place," Jones reported, helping to load Rose into the pod. "Our medical systems aren't calibrated for Astrian physiology." "Then we'll improvise," Mark growled. "Cooper, call in air support." I want those raiders scattered before they dash. A massive explosion cut him off as one of the raiders fired a heavy plasma cannon. The blast threw Mark and Jones behind a rock formation, the medical pod between them. Direct hit on Martinez's position. Rivera shouted. She's okay, but her armor's fried. Mark looked at the unconscious alien warrior. Base protocol was clear: if a situation became too hot, they were to retreat and preserve human lives. Trying to save this alien could get his whole squad killed. But then the Astrian's eyes flickered open. They were deep purple, filled with both pain and fierce determination. She tried to reach for her weapon, still ready to fight despite her grievous injuries. "Easy there, warrior," Mark said, hoping she could understand him. "We've got you." The alien's eyes widened in surprise, then understanding. She spoke, her translator converting her words to English. "You should leave me. Raiders have called reinforcements. No sense in humans dying for an Astrian." Mark checked his tactical display. She was right, more raider ships were approaching. But he'd made his decision the moment he'd seen her fighting alone against overwhelming odds. "Cooper," he called over the radio, "get everyone back to the dropships. I'm bringing our new friend." "Sergeant, that's not Dash." "That's an order, Lieutenant. I'll take full responsibility." Despite her protests, Rose couldn't stop Mark from lifting the medical pod himself. His armor's servos whined with the effort. Astrians were heavier than humans due to their dense bone structure. "Your superiors will punish you for this," Rose managed through gritted teeth as Mark began running toward the dropships. Mark managed a grim smile. "Probably. But you know what? Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking a few rules." Above them, Earth Defense Force fighters screamed through the atmosphere, their guns blazing at the approaching raider ships. The battle for survival was far from over, but as Mark carried Rose to safety, something unprecedented was beginning, a friendship that would challenge both human and Astrian assumptions about each other. The human medical bay was nothing like the advanced healing chambers Rose had seen in Astrian facilities. Yet here she was, surrounded by beeping machines and concerned faces, as doctors struggled to stabilize her condition with their primitive equipment. "Her cellular structure is remarkable," Dr. Wilson muttered, studying readings that made little sense to her. "The nanites in her bloodstream are fighting our treatments. We need to work with them, not against them." Rose drifted in and out of consciousness, her translator occasionally catching fragments of conversations. The humans were risking more than just their careers to help her. Their medical supplies weren't designed for Astrian physiology. Every treatment was a dangerous experiment. "Hey there, warrior." It was Mark's voice. He'd barely left the medical bay since bringing her in. "How are you holding up?" Rose tried to sit up, but the pain reminded her of her missing legs. "Why?" she asked. "Why risk so much for an alien? Your commanders must be furious." Mark pulled up a chair. His armor was gone now, replaced by a standard uniform. There were dark circles under his eyes, he looked exhausted. "Already got the official reprimand. Worth it though. You would have done the same for one of us." "You can't know that," Rose replied, but there was less certainty in her voice than she intended. "I saw you fighting those raiders. You could have surrendered, maybe saved yourself. But you were ready to die protecting whatever was in that survey data. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Rose was silent for a moment. The survey data, it was still in her armor's memory core. Data that could save her dying world. "The raiders," she said suddenly. "They weren't just pirates, were they?" Mark's expression darkened. "No. Intelligence thinks they were mercenaries hired by the Collective. We've been tracking their activities in this sector for months. The Collective, a shadowy alliance of species that opposed sharing advanced technology with lesser races. They considered humanity too primitive and aggressive to join the galactic community. And they had been slowly choking off the resources the Astrians needed to survive. "My people." Rose began, but stopped as pain shot through her nerve endings. "Are too proud to ask for help," Mark finished. "Yeah, we figured that out. But maybe it's time for both our species to stop letting pride get in the way of survival." Dr. Wilson entered with new scans. "The good news is, we've figured out how to work with your healing nanites. The bad news is, regenerating your legs isn't possible with our current technology." "There might be another way," Mark said. "Remember that experimental combat prosthetics program? The one using salvaged collective tech? Those are classified prototypes," Dr. Wilson protested. "And they're calibrated for human biology. But they're adaptable. And with Rose's knowledge of Astrian tech, we might be able to modify them." Mark turned to Rose. "What do you say? Want to help us stick it to the collective by turning their own tech against them?" Rose looked at this human who had already risked everything to save her. Her people had always seen humans as primitive, yet here they were, offering solutions her own people hadn't considered. Perhaps there was wisdom in their seemingly reckless creativity. "My superiors will need convincing," she said finally. Mark grinned. "Good thing I've got some practice dealing with stubborn commanding officers. But first, let's get you back on your feet, so to speak." For the first time since the explosion, Rose felt something she hadn't expected to find in this human facility: hope. Not just for herself, but for both their species. The experimental prosthetics lab was a strange mix of human ingenuity and salvaged alien technology. Rose watched as Mark and the technical team worked to modify the prototype legs, her own expertise helping bridge the gap between human and Astrian engineering. "The neural interface is the tricky part," Technical Officer Hayes explained, making adjustments to the silvery metal limbs. "Human nervous systems are relatively simple compared to Astrian biology. We're having to rewrite most of the base code." Rose leaned forward in her wheelchair, another human invention she'd had to get used to. "Your solution is unusual. Astrian scientists would never attempt to merge technologies this way." "That's because you're all too smart for your own good," Mark said, helping Hayes calibrate the sensitivity settings. "Sometimes the best solutions aren't the most elegant ones." The past week had been full of surprises. Despite their primitive technology, the humans had an incredible talent for improvisation. They didn't see problems as insurmountable, just challenges to overcome with enough determination and duct tape, as Mark called it. "Ready for the first test?" Hayes asked, wheeling over a diagnostic terminal. Rose nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. The prosthetics gleamed under the lab lights, a perfect blend of Astrian aesthetics and human functionality. The technical team had even managed to match the silvery tone of her skin. The installation process was painful, even with local anesthetics. Rose gritted her teeth as the neural connectors merged with her nervous system. Her translator picked up several creative human curse words from Mark as he monitored her vital signs. "Neural sync starting," Hayes announced. "Try to remain calm and, wait, these readings can't be right." Rose felt it immediately. The prosthetics weren't just responding to her neural impulses, they were actively integrating with her body's nanites. The pain suddenly increased tenfold. "Shut it down," Mark shouted, reaching for the emergency override. "No." Rose grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "It's adapting. My nanites are rewriting the interface protocols." The lab team watched in amazement as the connection points began to glow with a soft blue light. Rose's nanites were doing what they were designed to do, improving upon existing technology. "Can you move them?" Hayes asked after the glow subsided. Rose focused, and the prosthetic legs responded smoothly. Too smoothly. She stood up carefully, finding her balance. The legs felt nearly as natural as her original ones had. "This is impossible," Hayes muttered, checking the readings. "The neural integration is at 98%, better than anything we've achieved with human subjects." "Not impossible," Rose corrected. "Just unexpected. Like humans themselves." She took a tentative step, then another. Each movement became more confident. Mark watched with a mix of pride and concern. The collective's going to be really unhappy when they find out about this. Humans and Astrians working together, improving their stolen tech. "Let them be unhappy," Rose said, walking a complete circle around her wheelchair. "My people needed to learn that isolation leads to stagnation. Perhaps this collaboration can benefit both our species." "Speaking of benefits," Mark said carefully, "those raiders are still out there. And you're going to need time to fully adapt to the new legs. Maybe we could. Are you suggesting I stay and help train your Marines in anti-raider tactics?" Rose finished, a slight smile playing at her lips. "That would be a severe breach of Astrian protocol." "Absolutely. Completely against regulations." Mark grinned. "So, when do we start?" Rose took another walk around the lab, marveling at how the prosthetics seemed to anticipate her movements. Her people had always viewed humans as primitive, but there was nothing primitive about their spirit. Sometimes the greatest advances came not from superior technology, but from the willingness to try the impossible. "We already have," she answered. "And I think both our peoples will be better for it." The training arena echoed with the sound of pulse rifle fire as Rose demonstrated advanced Astrian combat techniques to a squad of eager Marine recruits. Her new legs moved fluidly as she ducked, rolled, and executed a perfect spinning kick that sent the training drone flying. "That's not fair," Private Rodriguez complained good-naturedly. "Those prosthetics make you faster than before." "The legs are not what make the warrior," Rose replied, helping Rodriguez up from his last failed attempt at the maneuver. "Your human bodies are capable of amazing things, you just need to learn to use them properly." Mark watched from the observation deck, alongside Captain Turner, who had finally stopped threatening to court-martial him for the unauthorized rescue. The results were hard to argue with. In just 3 weeks, Rose had improved the squad's combat effectiveness by over 200%. "The collective's getting nervous," Turner said, sliding a data tablet across to Mark. "Our sensors picked up 3 of their scout ships at the edge of the system yesterday." Mark studied the report with growing concern. "They're not just watching the base. They're tracking Rose specifically. Those raiders must have told them about the prosthetics project." Below, Rose was teaching the Marines how to counter advanced shield technology. Her silver skin gleamed with exertion, but her movements showed no sign of fatigue. The prosthetics had become a perfect extension of her body, perhaps even better than her original legs. "Command sent new orders this morning," Turner continued. "They want us to end the training program. Say it's too provocative, might trigger a diplomatic incident. With all due respect, sir, that's dash." An alarm cut through the air, its urgent tone sending everyone into battle stations. Rose was already moving, her enhanced legs carrying her to the observation deck in seconds. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, the base AI announced. Signatures match known collective vessels. They're launching fighters. "So much for diplomacy," Mark muttered. "Captain?" Turner was already activating the base's defense systems. "Get our people in the air." "Rose, I hate to ask, but dash." "I fight with you," she said firmly. "The collective must learn that they cannot bully either of our species any longer." The next few minutes were controlled chaos as Marines rushed to their positions. Rose joined Mark's squad in the armory, where they'd prepared a surprise for just this situation. "Remember that Astrian combat armor we salvaged from your wreck?" Mark asked, revealing a modified version of Rose's original suit. "Hayes and the tech team have been busy. It's fully compatible with your new legs now. Rose ran her hand over the familiar silver surface, now integrated with human technology. Like her legs, it represented the best of both their species. The collective thinks they can keep our peoples divided and weak, she said, sliding into the armor with practiced ease. They forget that the strongest metals are alloys. Poetic, Mark grinned, checking his own gear. But I think they're about to learn that lesson the hard way. Outside, the first explosions lit up the sky as Earth Defense Force fighters engaged the collective ships. Ground teams rushed to defensive positions, using the tactics Rose had taught them. "Squad, move out," Mark ordered. "Rose, you're with me. Let's show them what happens when they pick a fight with both our species." As they charged into battle, Rose felt a surge of pride. These humans, whom her people had dismissed as primitive, had given her back not just her legs, but a new purpose. Together, they might just change the galaxy's balance of power. The collective was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous force in the universe isn't advanced technology, it's the unbreakable bonds formed between those who choose to stand together. The sky above the human base had become a chaos of plasma fire and explosion trails. Collective ships pressed their attack while Earth Defense Force fighters demonstrated why humanity had survived countless conflicts. They were natural warriors, turning their technological disadvantage into an asset through sheer unpredictability. "They're trying to establish a landing zone in Sector 7. Rose called out, her enhanced armor sensors providing tactical data to the entire squad. Her prosthetic legs carried her swiftly between cover positions as she and Mark's team moved to intercept. "Just like you taught us," Mark replied, signaling his squad to spread out. "Let them think they've found our weak point." The collective forces were deploying their elite troops, warriors from species known for their technological superiority. They moved with mechanical precision, their advanced armor making them nearly invisible to standard sensors. But Rose and the Marines were ready. "Now!" Mark commanded. Rose leaped from cover, her modified armor blazing with energy as she engaged the nearest collective soldier. The enemy's surprise was evident. They'd expected a primitive human force, not an Astrian warrior fighting alongside them. Her prosthetic legs gave her unprecedented agility, allowing her to move in ways that confused their targeting systems. Meanwhile, the Marines executed their plan perfectly. While Rose drew attention, they used the simple but effective tactics she'd taught them. Collective soldiers found their advanced shields useless against precisely timed crossfire patterns. Their technology makes them predictable, Rose had explained during training. They rely too heavily on their system's superiority. Humans are chaos engines, use that. A massive collective walker stomped into view, its weapons charging. But before it could fire, Rodriguez and his team emerged from hidden positions, using grappling lines to scale its legs, a tactic that would have seemed suicidal to most advanced species. Primitive problems require primitive solutions. Rodriguez shouted gleefully, attaching breaching charges to the walker's joints. Rose couldn't help but smile as she watched the Marines work. Her people would have spent hours analyzing the walker's shield frequencies. The humans simply found its physical weak points and exploited them. "Base command, this is Sergeant Anderson," Mark radioed. "Enemy landing zone denied. But we've got a bigger problem, their flagship is positioning for an orbital strike." Through her armor's enhanced vision, Rose could see the massive vessel moving into position. Its main weapon could vaporize the entire base. The Earth Defense Force fighters were too busy with escorts to reach it. "I have an idea," Rose said, "but it's very human." Mark laughed. "Those are the best kind. What do you need?" "Get me to the old supply depot. And have Hayes ready to receive a transmission." The next few minutes were a blur of motion. While the rest of the squad kept collective forces occupied, Mark and Rose fought their way to the depot. Inside, Rose connected her armor systems to an old communications array. The collective's arrogance is their weakness, she explained while working. Their ships automatically scan for and absorb any Astrian data transmissions. They think our technology is too valuable to risk destroying. So we're going to give them something to download? Mark asked, covering the entrance. Yes, the complete technical specifications of my prosthetic legs and modified armor. When their systems try to analyze how humans manage to improve Astrian technology, it'll create a feedback loop in their processing cores, Mark finished, grinning. Like a computer virus. A very primitive computer virus, Rose confirmed. Something their advanced cyber defenses would never expect. Hayes? Ready to transmit, the technical officer's voice came through their comms. And may I say, this is the most beautifully inelegant solution I've ever seen. The flagship's weapons were powering up when Rose initiated the transmission. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, system after system began failing across the collective fleet. Their tactical advantage evaporated as their own technological superiority was turned against them. Sometimes, Rose said, watching the collective ships beginning to retreat, the best way forward is to step backward. Her prosthetic legs shifted as she turned to Mark. I believe I'm starting to understand why the collective fears humanity's influence so much. Mark helped her disconnect from the array. Why's that? Because you remind them that progress isn't always about having the most advanced technology. Sometimes it's about having the courage to try something new, or something very, very old. 2 months after the battle, Rose stood before the combined Council of Earth and Astrian leadership. Her prosthetic legs gleamed under the chamber lights, a visible symbol of what cooperation between their species could achieve. Mark stood at her side, both of them still wearing their modified combat armor, a deliberate choice for this presentation. The collective believed they could keep our peoples divided through fear and technological disparity, Rose began, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. They failed to understand that true strength comes not from isolation, but from unity. The assembled leaders murmured as Rose and Mark presented the battle data. The footage of human marines and an Astrian warrior fighting side by side was particularly compelling. But it was the technical specifications that caused the most excitement, the successful merger of human innovation with Astrian technology. What started as a simple act of compassion, Mark added, glancing at Rose, led to breakthroughs that neither of our species could have achieved alone. The prosthetics program was just the beginning. Rose demonstrated by moving through a series of complex maneuvers that would have been impossible with standard prosthetics. My new legs aren't just replacements, they're an improvement. Human creativity combined with Astrian precision. But more importantly, they represent hope. The Astrian science minister leaned forward. Hope? For both our peoples, Rose explained. The resources my survey mission discovered could save our dying world. And humanity's unique approach to problem solving could help us defend against the collective's aggression. The collective has already pulled back from 3 star systems, Earth's defense commander confirmed. They're afraid, not of our weapons, but of what our partnership represents. Mark stepped forward. We're proposing a joint defense and research initiative. Combine Earth's marine training programs with Astrian technology. Create more hybrid solutions like Rose's armor and prosthetics. Show the galaxy that advancement doesn't have to mean leaving others behind. The chamber erupted in discussion. Some voices were uncertain, clinging to old prejudices and fears. But others saw the potential, the strength that could come from embracing their differences rather than fearing them. Rose activated a hologram showing the successful repulsion of the collective attack. I lost my legs in battle, but I gained something far more valuable, understanding. My people thought humans were primitive. Humans thought we were arrogant. We were both right, and we were both wrong. Together, we're something new. The final vote wasn't even close. The joint initiative was approved, with the first training center to be established at the very base where Rose and Mark had made their stand. Later, standing on the observation deck watching the sunset, Rose and Mark reflected on how far they'd come. "Did you ever think," Rose asked, "when you found me dying on that battlefield, that it would lead to all this?" Mark shook his head. "I just knew I couldn't leave a fellow warrior behind. Everything else, that's just humans being human. We see something broken and we try to fix it, even if we have to break a few rules along the way. And Astrians learn to adapt," Rose added, flexing her prosthetic legs. "Even if it means admitting we don't have all the answers." Below them, the first group of human and Astrian trainees was arriving at the base. The future they represented wasn't perfect, there would be challenges, setbacks, and plenty of cultural misunderstandings to overcome. But it was a future built on the best qualities of both species. The collective thought they could keep the galaxy divided, Mark said. Instead, they brought us together. Rose smiled, watching a human instructor already deep in conversation with an Astrian engineer. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson in all of this. Sometimes losing something. She glanced down at her legs, helps you find something far more precious. Hope? Mark asked. Family, Rose corrected, looking at the humans and Astrians working together below. A family that stretches across the stars. The red dwarf sun sank below the horizon, but its light caught the silver of Rose's skin and the gleam of her prosthetic legs, a reminder that even in darkness, there was always hope for a brighter dawn.